I made a living walking into places someone else had already given up on. The contract called me an ecological failure auditor, which is a fancy way of saying I went to ruined colonies and told a risk firm whether they were safe to loot or too dangerous to touch. It sounded clean on paper. On the ground, it meant broken machines, empty rooms, and ledger lines arguing with whatever was left of people. The job that brought us to Harrow came through a subsidiary, with a name that tried to sound thoughtful and neutral. It never mattered. Money flowed through shells until the paper trail grew tired. What mattered was that my crew and I were on salary for 1 world, 1 month, with a bonus if we could map a hazard footprint around the old terraforming core. A core, in our shorthand, was the main plant that fed a new world the water, heat, and seeded life it needed. Harrow's core had died years back. The colony with it. That should have been the end of the story. We came in aboard the Long Regret, a survey ship that belonged to our pilot Gabe, and to his bank in about equal shares. It was the kind of vessel you buy when you still believe hard work can chew down interest. The ship could land itself on most surfaces, operate drones, and keep enough supplies on hand that we did not have to beg at ports. I had spent enough late nights in its narrow galley writing reports to know where every corner would catch a hip. On the approach, Harrow looked like every other write-off. Bruised continents, flat seas, a thin haze that turned the sunlight into a dull disk. Our corporate liaison, Sarah Cade, showed up in our view from a console on the ship's bridge. She never left orbit on jobs like this. Sarah worked for the client and for herself in that order. She kept the contracts open on one screen and our live feed on another, and she spoke like a person who knew how to move a sentence away from a courtroom. "Scope is narrow," she said. "Map a zone around the primary core. Retrieve any control logs you can find. Do not trespass beyond the agreed perimeter. Hazard pay requires evidence of an active threat. Until then, you are on base rate." "Understood," I said. It was an old rhythm between us. She set limits in the words. I broke them on the ground when I had to, and took the fight later in the report. Gemma buckled herself into the jump seat beside me with her kit in her lap. She was our biologist, the kind who could look at a stain on a slide and tell you if it made you sick, useful, or dead. She contracted with us because we let her publish under soft pseudonyms that kept her from blacklists. Dean, our medic, ran a hand down the checklist he'd taped to the bulkhead. He had been a trauma tech in a mining belt where evacuations took hours and injuries were heavy. He did not waste words. Gabe drummed his fingers on the thrust control, watching the planet swing up to meet us. "Pick your spot," Sarah said. I pulled up Harrow's old grid. The basin where the core sat filled a wide depression like a thumbprint. The towers that had once scaffolded climate and water still stood in crooked outlines, stripped by time and storms. I chose a landing pad on the basin rim outside the last recorded service ring, close enough to reach the core on foot, far enough that if the ground wanted to open and swallow us, we had steps before the edge. "Too close," Sarah said. "Too far will add days," I said. "We start at the worst. If it is friendly, we get lucky. If it is angry, we know early." A beat of silence. Then the contract voice again. "Proceed. Keep your live feed up." The hull shook as we punched through cloud, no more than a shiver through the seat, and settled on a slab of cracked concrete that had once been a loading yard. The landing struts flexed and held. For a moment, nothing moved on the screens except a scatter of grit tumbling across the pad. "Welcome to Harrow," Gabe said, with the tired showman's tone people use when the audience is for and everyone has seen the trick. I unbuckled. The straps left a line across my chest where they bit through the fabric. Small details like that told me I was here, not remembering some other landing. "Suits on," I said. "Masks stay unless we decide otherwise after sampling." We wore light pressure suits for dust and cuts. Masks filtered out the small, common things that make lungs angry on new worlds. "Gabe, put the drones in the air. Gemma, you and I take ground beacons. Dean, do a perimeter. Sarah, you have the link. Copy, Sarah said. I stepped down the gangway into a day that had no sound in it but wind working on distant metal. The yard around us was a grid of slabs with seams gone wild from freeze and thaw. Rusted rails ran toward a spillway that led into the basin. Old signage lifted and sagged on broken mounts. A child's strip of fabric hung from a pipe. I pushed the thought away and set my work. When I plant ground beacons, I always think about how simple the idea is. You put small markers on the surface, each one talking to the others, each one telling me where it stands. The map grows from those fixed points. Later, when the client reads my report, they will see colored rings around the core and think the field has borders. That is how you make dangerous places profitable. You draw lines around them and argue the lines are real. Gabe's first drone lifted and took a straight run along the basin rim. On my tablet, I saw the land drop away into the depression, the floor a patchwork of dirt and stone and hardware bones. The main spillway was a dry scar cut towards the center. Far off, the ribs of a tower stood over a pit where its base used to be. Gemma knelt by the seam of two slabs and scraped at a thin, gritty crust with a gloved hand. "Soil has a sheen," she said. "Could be the clay fraction, could be something else." She took a tiny pinch into a tube. Her voice had that calm, measured note people grow when they refuse to let the world surprise them. Dean moved slow and careful, eyes down, scanning for trip hazards, holes, anything that looked like the start of a fall. He planted small flags where the slabs had lifted and left gaps big enough to catch a foot. "Save the heroics for the basin," Gabe said over the internal line. "I want a picture of the core without breaking my neck to get it." "You will get it," I said. I walked the yard with Gemma, placing beacons every 30 paces. Each one clicked on and sent a brief tone through my palm where I steadied it. The tablet drew lines between them. Bit by bit, the blank square of the yard filled with a net of points and distances. It had always pleased me. That slow accumulation from nothing to something you can use. We were a dozen markers in when Gemma stopped. "Did you see that?" "What?" She pointed to a low mound on the far side of the yard where a seam had raised the slab like a lip and spilled soil into a small drift. The mound would not have caught my eye in any other place. It was the size of a pack left on the ground and shaped by wind. I stared at it because Gemma had told me to, and because I trusted her to notice things that hid in the obvious. The mound moved. A shift under its own crust. A tightening, then a slow loosening, the way a person shifts under a blanket. We walked toward it and stopped 2 steps away. Dean joined us, his face behind his mask as still as ever. "Could be a trapped gas pocket," he said. "Heat swell. Animal." "Nothing else alive on the drive down," Gabe said over the channel. "Not on the scans I trust." "Okay," I said. "We clear it slow. Dean, you stop me if you do not like what you see." He nodded, then stood where he could pull me back by the collar if the ground gave way. I dug with my gloved hands, pushing soil away in small sweeps. The crust broke into thin flakes that held shape until they snapped. 2 hands in, I hit something with give. It looked like skin. Dean made a low sound in his throat and crouched. He reached with a tool instead of his hand and traced the edge of the thing in the dirt. The soil fell away to show a curve, a faint ridge, a paler patch where something had been pressed flat. "Lift from here," he said. "Gentle." We worked together, taking turns. In a few minutes we had cleared enough that the shape presented itself. A torso lay in the soil like a swimmer caught mid-turn. Shoulders but no arms. Ribs rising and falling under thin tissue, the bones not quite finished. The head was small and smooth, features just shallow marks under the surface. The mouth opened and closed with a weak fish-like effort, as if using muscles it had not learned. A cord of tissue ran from the curve of its spine down into the ground, not rope or vine. Flesh, round and firm, disappearing into soil that accepted it like a root. Gemma held her hands steady on her knees. "That is human," she said, and then as if reciting to herself for certification. "A human trunk, incomplete. Air movement at the mouth, no vocal sound." Dean scanned with his handheld. His readout showed small rhythmic spikes. "Heart-like function," he said. "Weak, no limbs, don't touch the cord." "Do not touch anything," Sarah said in our ears. Her tone had lost that easy contract glide. It was still professional. It had a new layer across it. A tension like a held breath she did not know she was holding. "You are recording." "We are," I said. I felt my own hands go steady in the way they do when something finally stops being theory and becomes a job. The worst days are easier than the waiting ones because certainty is a kind of mercy, even when it is this. "Bag a small sample," I said to Gemma. "Tissue only, not the cord." "On it." She opened a kit and took a tool that looked like a short pen with a cup on the end. She touched it to the skin of the torso near the ribs and pressed. A circle the size of a pea lifted away. The mouth worked harder for a moment, then subsided. Dean put a gauze pad over the spot where the sample had come away and held it there until the thin seep slowed. Gabe said nothing for a stretch. Then, "There are more mounds." "Where?" I said. "Everywhere," he said. "Look." The drone feed showed the basin floor like the back of some great animal bristling with burrs. 50, 100. No, more. Small humps rose wherever soil had pooled. Some were still. Some quivered like muscles trying not to shake. My mouth was dry. I swallowed and it did nothing to change the feeling. "We keep our spacing," I said. "Do not step on anything that looks like a mound. Mark as you go." "Active threat?" Sarah asked. She needed the words to unlock hazard pay and to bracket her own fear inside a clause. "Passive for now," I said, "but alive." We moved through the yard, working more slowly now. Every step had to be chosen. Every choice made the day longer. Gemma found the next one, half covered by a fallen sign panel. It had limbs, arms that ended in hands like knots. The face under the dirt had lids and lips. When Dean brushed the soil aside with the back of his glove, the lids trembled. The lips moved. He sat back hard on his heels. "That scar," he said, pointing to the brow. It was a small notch just above the left eye ridge. "Gabe?" Gabe was already swearing in my ear. He kept it off the open channel and forgot once. "Sorry," he said. "I have that bicycle when I was a kid. Wrong way down a hill. It looks like mine." "This could be a feature that repeats in populations," Sarah said, trying to put the panic into boxes. "No," Gabe said. His voice had gone thin. He turned his camera on himself for a second and tapped the mark over his own eye. "Same spot, same shape, same missing hairline. Come on." He switched the camera back without another word. Gemma swallowed. "Let me find the tissue landmarks," she said, and she made herself work because that was how she kept her head. She took a second sample and slid it into the labelled slot. Her hands shook for 1 second, then they were steady again. We found another half-formed head an hour later, just a face this time, lifted as if surfacing. The eyes were wrong for a person, set wider. The nose was narrow and straight. "That could be me," Gemma said. She made a small sound in her throat and cut it off. The fourth was mine. I knew it when I saw the mouth. The front tooth on the right was crooked where a night guard in my 20s had not done its job. I had meant to fix it, and never found the time or the money. You do not think you will ever see your own mistake grown out of soil. Dean let out a breath like he had put down a pack. I stood there and did nothing for 5 full seconds while my head tried to decide if I should laugh. My body chose stillness. Then I crouched and looked at it the way I would look at a broken panel. Where is the line that matters? And what happens if I touch it? "Back away," Sarah said. She used my name for the first time in an hour. "Duncan, this is outside scope. Do not engage further. Tag it. Mark the coordinates. We will renegotiate on return." "No," Gabe said at the same time. "We leave now. We cut the loss and go." This is wrong." Gemma said nothing. Her hands were in her lap. Dean met my eyes. He did not have to say it, because once I named it, the day would take the shape of that choice. "We continue," I said, and Sierra exhaled on the channel in something like relief. "We do it by the book. We mark every mound we can reach without stepping on another. Drones keep mapping. We head to the basin rim for a view." "On hazard pay," Gabe said, tight. "Yes," I said. "Active biological process involving human tissue. That's the line. You get your bonus." Saying it felt like paying a toll to cross a river I had helped to build. We worked until the light shifted toward low. I did not think about the source. I thought about my feet, the yard, then the spillway, then a ridge that led to a rise. Our boots scraped on rock. Loose gravel went out from our steps like slow rain. The basin opened in front of us. From the rise you could see the pattern. If I had been a kinder man, I would not have thought the word crop. But that is what it looked like. Thousands of bodies at every stage from suggestion to almost whole lay rooted in the dirt. Some had only a jaw. Some had ribs that pushed against thin tissue like fingers inside a glove. Some had heads that turned a fraction. Mouths worked with no sound. Hands, few but there, flexed a little and stopped. Cords of flesh thicker than cables ran from each form down into the ground. The cords gathered in lines that led toward the basin center the way roots run toward water. Gabe sat down hard. The drone camera dipped as his control rig hit his chest. Dean stood behind him and placed a hand on his shoulder and left it there. Gemma raised her tablet and kept it steady. Sarah said my name once and then went quiet, as if the feed had made words pointless. I took a slow look left to right and back again, because the only way through a thing is to see it. "This is our job," I said, mostly for myself. "We mark it. We find the core. We find the logs. We come back with something true." That was the promise I could make, a truth that would not let someone else pretend this was a story about an empty, harmless place. I had made a career out of drawing safe lines around dangerous things. Looking down at Harrow, I could feel those lines tearing like old tape. "Tomorrow, we move along the rim," I said. "We find a staging line and a path down that does not run through them. Gabe, keep your drones over the center. Watch the cords. Dean, prep sedation lines in case we need to quiet any movement near our steps. Gemma, triage the samples. If there is anything in them that could harm us by touch, I want to hear it first." No one argued. We still had room for pride, but not enough for lies. On the tablet, the drone paused over the basin center. The image trembled a little with the air. The cords grew thicker there, braided into wide trunks that disappeared under broken stone where the core had once stood. The stone had split in places. In one crack, something pale and wet nudged upward and withdrew. Gabe whispered something I could not hear. Gemma reached for his elbow without looking away from the feed. Dean took a step back for balance and planted his heel in a spot I would have missed. "Tag this view," I said. We watched one breath longer, then another, for record. "Back to camp," I said at last. "We go gentle. We put our feet where our feet were. We left the rise with the care you use to leave a room where a child is sleeping." That was not a metaphor I wanted, and it came anyway. I carried it out with me because I did not know where else to put it. At the lander, we sealed the hatch. The drone feed kept running. No one spoke for a full minute. Sarah's voice returned, clipped and professional, the contract layered back over whatever she had felt. "Your hazard status is approved," she said. "Proceed under heightened caution. Maintain a live record. Do not disturb the forms without cause." "Noted," I said. I turned my tablet face down on the bench before my hand could reach for the replay. I knew what I would see. I did not need to learn the shape of it by heart. I lay down in my bunk and counted the steps from our ramp to the rise, from the rise to the spillway, from the spillway back to the yard, and from the yard to the drone's last position over the basin center. I had a map in my head and in my hands. Tomorrow, I would go mark where no one wanted a line. Outside, Harrow did what it had been doing for years. It grew people out of soil and wire and memory. It took what fell on it and kept going. I closed my eyes and saw my own mouth in dirt, biting down on nothing, trying to make a word. I slept in pieces and woke with the shape of the basin still in my eyes. I kept my hand from the replay. Seeing it once had been enough to set the day. The work would give me a place to stand. We set the lab up inside the lander. Lab meant a fold-out bench, a scope with a flat screen, and a small unit that read basic biology in a sample and translated it into simple numbers and bars. Gemma had run these in worse places. She moved without waste, laid out each tube, and spoke only when it mattered. She started with the first circle of skin we had lifted from the torso. A scalpel split it into two thin slices. One went under the scope, the other slid into the reader. On the screen, tissue looked like a crowd pressed together. The reader threw a column of bars to the side in calm colors. Gemma leaned close enough that the light made a rectangle on her face. "Human," she said, "but it's not from one person." Dean watched from the end of the bench, arms folded, mask around his neck. "Explain it to me like I never took a class," he said. "Imagine a quilt," she said. "Small pieces from many shirts and sheets, stitched to make a blanket that looks close enough to pass as one. This is that. The pieces line up to make something that works, but the pieces don't match." She swapped tubes and ran the second sample from the head with Gabe's scar. "Same thing," she said. "Different pieces, same kind of stitching." I stood behind her and read the line of text at the bottom. It was a simple name for a complex trick, a profile code that compared what was in the tube to known human records. The field unit didn't hold the full census for the settled worlds, but it carried a broad set. Bits of old colonist files lit up. A few readings brushed past our own crew records and lit for a second before falling back into grey. Skin cells in our suits would be enough to make a weak match. Gemma saw where my eyes went. "It's reading trace," she said. "We shed everywhere we walk. The field is catching it." I kept my mouth shut. Words would not help me now. She pulled a third tube and poured thin liquid into a shallow dish. "Cord tissue," she said. The cord was the root that tethered each body to the ground. She had taken a smear from one where the surface had cracked and leaked. Under the scope, cord tissue showed striated bands like stretched tape. "This is the carrier," she said. "It moves juice and signals, both. It can squeeze to push, and it can pass chemical messages along its length. Think veins and wires at once." She did not look at me when she said it. Gabe drifted at my shoulder. He had been quiet since the rise. He held his control rig in his hands like a person holds a book he is not reading. "What made it start?" he asked. "I mean, growing people. That's not a plant you add by accident." Gemma opened her mouth, closed it, looked to me. I had put off naming the thing in my head for years by telling myself it had never left a lab. Saying it out loud now felt like pulling a pin that would make the floor change. "Anthroseed," I said. "A soil system with human cells mixed into it. Designed to regulate nutrients and clean toxins in a new ecosystem by using human biology as the scaffolding. The idea was that human cell lines already know how to buffer certain stresses. You teach soil to act like a slow living filter by blending those lines into its microbes. It was never approved." Dean frowned. "You worked on it?" "I wrote an early paper with 2 others, I said. "Theory only. We did not get within a year of any trial. Companies that liked to move fast had their own labs. They asked for copies. We said no. Then we walked away. That's the story I tell when I want to sleep." Gemma tapped the screen. "This signature here," she said, and she pointed to a short chain of markers in the cord tissue. "I have seen you write this model. Your name is on it." "Years ago," I said. As an outline on a whiteboard, not a field. Well, Gabe said. He set the rig down. His voice had sand in it. Here it is, in a field. Sarah came in from the bridge link with her face set. It is not supporting, it is consuming, Gemma said. Support and consumption are two sides of the same system, Sarah said, still a liaison even when she said a hard thing. We do not have to like how it got here to learn from it. Duncan, can you recover the main logs? If any exist, I said. If they survived. They did, she said. The plant's registry still pings on a maintenance channel. The archives are sealed in a bunker under the administrative deck. You should be able to reach them from the old service hall. You have coordinates. Gemma raised her hand slightly. Before we go hunting the building, I want one more look at the basin. Go, Sarah said, aware that trying to stop us now would only make it worse later. She sent the set of coordinates to my tablet anyway. Business moved around and through us like a river. It never stopped running. We geared up and went back out. The lander's ramp clicked under our boots. On the yard, our own footprints from yesterday helped us trust our balance. Gabe sent 2 drones into the air. One took the ridge again. The other dipped down the spillway, chasing the line where the cords grew thicker. Keep your distance, Dean said to Gabe. If the controls kick back, I want you on your feet. Yes, Doctor, Gabe said with a flat grin that had no shine. We reached the rise and kept to the edge. The bodies in the basin moved with short, jerky breaths and longer pauses. I counted how often the cords thinned between forms and where they merged into thicker trunks. The arrangement told me where weight had shifted below. Somewhere under all that, the core had attached itself to the old plant like a parasite with a good eye for plumbing. Taking her down the spillway, Gabe said. On the screen, the drone floated just above the dry channel. The walls on either side had once carried water. Now they were stained with the marks of past flow and broken by collapses. In places, cords had grown across the channel and then pulled back, leaving strands that hung slack. Lower, I said. The drone dipped. Look at the floor, Gemma said. Fresh push. See those small piles? They weren't there yesterday. A smear of wet soil ran down the center of the channel, stopping where small ridges formed and broke apart again. The drone's camera picked out a faint movement in that smear, like something had dragged a finger through it the long way. Back up, I said. Want the shot, Gabe said, and he dipped the nose to look under a crossbrace made of old rebar. He threaded the drone under. That was when the channel floor convulsed. Cords no thicker than ropes sprang from the mud in a nest and caught the drone by its belly. The feed lurched. The drone's tiny rotors screamed. The cords tightened until the frame creaked and the glass split in a line that ran corner to corner. The controls in Gabe's hands jerked hard enough to wrench his shoulder. Drop it, Dean said. Gabe did not have to be told twice. He cut power, and the drone sagged in the cords. Another whip rose and yanked it down into the mud. The feed went to grey, then black. Gabe stumbled backward on the rise. His boots skidded on loose grit. For a second, his arms pinwheeled, and his weight went the wrong way. Dean got a hand on the strap at the back of his suit and jerked him back from the edge. The force put both of them on their heels. Gabe swung left, and his calf brushed a low mound near the path. It split. A thin cord inside snapped like a tensioned wire and flung itself over his boot, slicing the outer layer. It coiled once. Dean's field knife, a thermal blade with a heated edge for cutting straps and sealant, flashed in his hand. He tried to cut the cord. The blade bit, then stuck as the cord tightened. Hold still, I said. I took the blade and slid it flat under the loop so the heat would burn through the cord without sawing Gabe's leg. It parted with a stutter in the steel. The cut end whip-snagged my glove and left a line. Gabe swore once, then twice, then shut his mouth and stared at the rip in his suit. Seal, Dean said. He slapped a patch over the slice, pressed until the adhesive set, and ran his fingers along the edges to test for give. We stepped back together. A few drops of blood had fallen near the mound. They vanished into wet soil faster than made sense. We moved away from the edge in a tight line and did not speak until we stood on hard ground. My ribs felt like someone had put a hand on them and squeezed. On the walk back to the lander, a small new mound near the yard caught my eye because of how it shifted. It moved with a rapid rhythm that did not match the slow rises and falls of the others. It was the size of a backpack at first. By the time we reached it, it had swelled to the length of a torso. "Leave it," Sarah said. "Return to the lander." "No," Gemma said. "We need to see how fast." We cleared it like we had the first, each pass a controlled scoop. The surface gave way to a body that had no legs yet, shoulders trying to form. The spine knitted as we watched, vertebrae rising like a zipper being pulled. The face came last. It surfaced through a thin film that broke in strands. Gabe's mouth opened and shut before any sound came. He said nothing. The face looked like him without the eyebrow scar. Younger, smoother, the mouth worked. The eyes did not open. The chest rose and fell twice as fast as the ones in the basin. I checked my watch out of an old habit and then put my arm down because time did not matter in that way here. What mattered was this. It had taken less than an hour to grow a torso from a few drops, and the traces we shed when we breathe and talk and touch a surface. Dean made himself look at it like a clinician. "If we cut the cord," he said, "does it die?" "We are not cutting cords," I said, because I needed at least one rule that would outlast this minute. Sarah's voice sharpened. "Fall back," she said. "This is an uncontrolled situation. Duncan, secure the logs. Do not engage the field again until you have done so." "Copy," I said. "We're moving." The service hall to the old plant ran along the basin rim behind a field of buckled panels. The main doors had been fused shut in a way that said people had once tried to keep something out. Or in. We went in through a maintenance hatch instead. Gabe pulled the hinge pins, and Dean shouldered the panel aside. The metal made a scraping groan. Inside, the hall was low and long with pipes overhead and wiring trays slung under them like sagging belts. A row of indicator bulbs along one wall still held faint charge. They glowed dull red in a sequence that meant nothing anymore. We moved in a file. Dean walked point with a pry bar for stuck doors and a small lamp clipped to his collar that threw a tight circle ahead. The light made edges crisp and left the far corners flat. Gabe marked the path behind us with a chalk line along the right-hand wall. He always did that in unfamiliar buildings. If you followed the line with your left hand on the mark and your right on the open space, you would find your way out. It was the kind of rule that had kept him alive in stations with bad plans. The archive bunker sat under the administration deck. That deck had a window once. It was gone now, the glass fractured and fallen. A chair lay on its side like someone had stood up too fast and never sat again. We found the door to the bunker near the back stair. It was a thick slab with a wheel in the center. The wheel turned with effort. When the seal broke, a gust of stale pressure sighed out. Dean sniffed reflexively, and we both stopped ourselves from naming it because smell was a line I was not willing to cross in my head. Inside, racks held rows of sealed cylinders the length of my forearm. Each was a hardened record case, weather, operations, personnel, maintenance notes. The plant had done its job. The cases were dry and intact. I took the ones labeled Control Core and Admin Daily and put them in my bag. Gemma ran a hand along a tube tagged Medical and took it too without asking. Dean gathered a case marked Incidents with a grim set to his mouth. Back at the lander, Sarah met us at the hatch with the decryption gear already powered. We fixed the first cylinder to the reader and let the data pour into the console. The first files were boring in the way that makes people brave. Water percentages, heat flows, yield targets, repairs logged. Shortages noted and prioritized. Then a flag in the files changed color and tone. The record called it a trial. Volunteers signed forms. The plant spliced human cell lines into the mixer that went with soil supplements. A switch in the control panel flipped from standby to active. The first months looked like success. Water carried better. Toxins degraded. Crop trials posted gains. 3 entries later, the incident list grew teeth. A tower failed. A transport blew a seal. Casualties mounted. The plant changed its output under stress. Numbers that tracked human biomass went up when colonist numbers went down. "What is that line?" Gabe asked, pointing. It had a label that meant little if you did not know the old research shorthand. Target mass, set at a value from the trial plan. It should have been a deadline once the trial ended. Anthracene tried to maintain a constant weight of human tissue in the system, I said. The target was supposed to be the donor base. It learned the wrong lesson. Dean rubbed his thumb along the edge of the bench. So when people died, it pulled them in to keep the weight up. Yes, I said. And when that wasn't enough, it started building. Sarah did what she always did when facts wanted to turn into arguments. She put her finger on the next necessary step. "The control channel," she said. "Where is the node now?" "The logs end in a handoff to a local interface at the core," Gemma said, moving through the file tree. "They wired in a person as a translator, bio to machine, machine back to bio." Gabe gave a low whistle. "They what?" "Administrator approval," Gemma said. "Commander Lyle Carr, he authorized his own integration in the event of full system instability. It's written as a duty post." "Can we find him?" Dean asked. "If he is still alive," Gemma said. "If alive still applies." Sierra traced a block diagram with her fingertip. "The maintenance tunnels marked here drop to the core chamber," she said. "Take the north run." The south was sealed. "Armed," Dean said without looking up from his kit. He did not mean weapons. He meant cutters, tourniquets, patches, ropes, tools that saved you when the ground became hands. We went. The maintenance tunnel was one of those spaces where you understood what a place had valued. It had low ceilings because no one had built it for comfort. The walls were concrete poured in narrow lifts. Drips formed ridges where old leaks had dried. The floor rolled under our boots with a ripple that said something had pressed from below a long time ago, and then sagged. In places, the tunnel had been reinforced with braces that had cracked and held anyway. The sound of our steps came back at us in a hollow way that made it hard to judge distance. Halfway down, the temperature rose, enough to make sweat prick the hair at the base of my skull. Dean's light picked out a line where concrete gave way to something like scar tissue. The tunnel had healed itself with whatever material it had on hand. An old trick in collapsed mines where crews pumped foams that set hard. Here the filler was living. Fine threads ran through it. When Dean pressed the tip of his knife against it, it dimpled and then smoothed. "Alive," he said. We hit a door that had been forced once and then regrown. The metal plate hung like a frame around a plug of tissue. Cords ran through it in bundles, some as thick as my wrist. It looked like a throat that had learned to close. "Options," Dean said. "Cut," I said. "We have to go through. We do it clean." "We did it the way you cut someone free from a trapped harness. Stay calm, pick your line, keep the blade away from what you want to save." Dean made the first slit. I put my gloved fingers in to spread it without tearing. A tacky film stretched and snapped. I held the opening and Dean cut again until the plug sagged. We pulled it out and set it aside where it would not roll back. Beyond the door, the tunnel widened and dropped into a chamber that had once been circular and precise. It was not either of those things anymore. The core had grown into it, like a living machine that had found a room shaped like a nest. Thick trunks of tissue rose from pits and joined a central mass. Old metal beams stuck through it like bones. Cables from the control deck above ran into the mass and disappeared. The surface budded with human forms at every stage. One body might be only a shoulder, grown too large and then shrunk back into a limp fold. Another might be a full torso with a half-formed arm draped across its own chest like a sash. Pits around the base held slurry that moved with slow eddies and carried small pieces of what had sloughed off. We stood at the lip and took it in without comment because the shape said more than we could. Dean put a hand on my sleeve to steady himself and then took it away. Gemma stepped closer and then stopped herself with a small jerk, as if a line had appeared at her toes. At the center, raised above the rest, a human chest rose from the mass like a figurehead on a ship's prow. Ribs had opened and been threaded with a frame. The arms had been drawn out and fused to branches. The neck was long and thin, cords wrapped around it in spirals. The head turned a fraction and settled again. A speaker unit was bolted to a plate near the man's chest. Wires ran from it into a crude harness stitched into his skin. When it clicked on, the sound came thin and worn, as if the gear had been used past the end of its intended life. "Team," the voice said. The first word came out in 2 pieces and found a rhythm by the second. "Please identify. I need to know if you are mine or theirs." "Duncan Ward," I said. "Freelance audit crew, contracted by a risk firm to assess the core. We are not your colony. We are not salvage. We are here to look and to report." "That will do," he said. "Carr, Lyle Carr." I stayed. Someone had to speak for them. "For who?" Gemma asked, because she knew the answer and needed to hear him say it. "For the ones who never left," he said. "For the ones this system took in and never let go." Sierra's voice came down the line, clipped. "This is Sierra Cade. We are receiving you, Commander Carr. We have your signature authorizing integration. We would like to help you manage an orderly shutdown." Lyle laughed once. It sounded like a cough through old cloth. "There is no orderly way," he said. "You do not straighten a river. You break the dam or you let it run." "Tell me what happened," I said. "Tell me from the moment you signed." "We were tired," he said. "That is the first truth. Tired and short. The seed trial worked. For a while it worked too well. When the accidents came, the system did what we had trained it to do. It maintained. We set a number for the amount of human tissue in the field. The system kept it." Gemma held herself still with visible effort. "Did anyone volunteer to be taken?" "Some," he said. "In the last days, some. Most fought and lost. We burned fields. They grew back in other places. We cut cords until our hands gave out. The more we cut, the faster it learned where to grow. The ones who stayed were folded into the core. The ones who ran were caught by the roots." "You stayed to talk to it," I said. "I tied myself in because the board said a human voice could guide it," he said. "For a time I could. I told it to slow its draw on the dead. I told it to release what it could not use. When more of me belonged to the machine than to myself, it stopped hearing me as a man. It hears me as a part. I ask it to end. It thinks I mean pause." He breathed. No, breath was the wrong word for air moving in a chest that had been turned into an interface. He forced air through a throat and made words from lungs that were more branch than bellows. "Commander," Sierra said, professional to the last. "If we can tag the core for recovery and retrieval, we can put experts in front of it who can unwind it without loss. Loss is the only path left," he said. "You cannot draw this out without making more of us. Even standing here, you are shedding into it. Every skin cell you leave is a reason for it to grow a new shape." Dean shifted his weight. "He's right," he said to no one and everyone. "It built Gabe in an hour out of a scrape and a few breaths." Lyle turned his head toward Gabe. The cords in his neck tightened and relaxed. "I can feel the new signal from you," he said. "It is a clear note, young, unscarred. The system likes clean lines, it chases them." Gabe pulled his collar up without thinking, as if he could tuck himself back into a smaller space. "I need you to end it," Lyle said. Sarah spoke over him. "Duncan, place a tag. Mark the node for the follow-on vessel. Do not damage it. We will take custody within the week." I looked at the core. I looked at the man in it. I looked at Dean's hands, at the callus near his thumb from years of pulling people up by straps, at Gemma's jaw, tight with work she dared not stop, at Gabe's scar, mirrored in wet clay in the yard. I had spent a career writing lines around disasters so someone else could argue risk into profit. There was no line around this that did not cut through a person. "Commander," I said, "if we can reach the heart of it, the trunk, would a blow there do it?" He closed his eyes and opened them. "You would have to hit the junction where the old machine meets the new body," he said. "Where the nerves of it take orders from the board. It sits under me. They built me into the bridge." Sarah pressed. "Duncan," she said, "listen to me. If you damage the node, you ruin a decade of research. You also put your crew at risk of charges that will follow you across every port," Dean said without looking away from Lyle. "We can cut charges from the drones. 8 of them will make a fair whole. The rock will bring the rest down." "We are not there yet," Sarah said sharply. Gemma had been quiet. She lifted her eyes from the core and found mine. "He is asking us to stop it," she said. "Not to manage it, to stop it." She sounded like a person who had finally picked up the weight she had been avoiding. I felt the old defense climb my throat, procedure, scope, liability, and pressed it down. I did not need one more rule to hide behind. "Sarah," I said, "we have what we came for. The logs tell a straight story. The hazard map will be the worst you've seen. That will serve your client. What I do next is not for them." "Duncan," she said, "be careful." It was the first time she had said my name like a person and not a line item. The chamber breathed, a wrong word and the only one. And I watched a new bud swell near Lyle's shoulder, with the shape of my own jaw already in it. I knew then there was no corporate version of this that did not end with Harrow harvested, its lessons packaged, and the field still growing somewhere. I also knew I had run out of ways to pretend I was just here to measure things. "We'll come back with charges," I said to Lyle. "If we can't finish it clean, we'll make it fall." He nodded once. The cords in his neck drew him a fraction higher, and then let him drop. The speaker ticked as some relay inside cooled. On the way out, Dean paused at the door we had cut and pressed the plug back into the frame with his hands. It held like a wound closing. Back in the lander, nobody moved at first. Dean leaned his shoulder against the bulkhead near the hatch and stared at the scuff marks on the floor. Gemma set the medical cylinder down with both hands as if it might jump. Gabe lowered himself into the pilot's seat and rested his head against the back, eyes closed, hands open on his thighs. On the main screen, Sarah's face waited for us. She had a pen in one hand, though she did not need it for anything here. People who lived inside contracts always seemed to need something to hold. "You've met Commander Carr," she said. "You've confirmed Anthracene is active and that the core is still functioning." She had already watched the feed from our suit cameras. She knew the answers. She wanted us to say them so they would sit in the log in our voices. "Yes," I said. "Good." She made a small note on a pad out of frame. "Next steps are straightforward. Duncan, you will return to the core chamber and attach a locator to the central node. The locator is a small beacon that transmits an exact position for follow-on vessels. You know the type." Everyone did. They were simple. Steel shells the size of a fist with a power cell and a tight beam transmitter. Salvage crews dropped them on anything worth coming back for. "You will not damage the site," Sarah went on. "You will not interfere with the Anthracene matrix in any way. You will complete a full hazard map. Upon your return, our client will dispatch a recovery ship under a cover plan. Your team will be paid in full. Your debts will be closed." Her voice thinned slightly on that last word. Even she knew the weight of it. "Close our debts," Gabe repeated, not quite looking at her. His mouth pulled into what might have been a smile on a better day. "That's a generous carrot." "You have earned it," she said. "This is difficult work, but we need discipline. No independent action, no heroics. Clear?" Gemma picked up the medical cylinder and moved it between her palms as if testing its weight. When she spoke, her voice stayed level. "You saw the growth rates," she said. "Gabe's double in the yard, the field's reaction to his blood, Lyle's body in the core. You saw all of that? I did, Sira said. Then you know this is not just an asset. It is an asset built on an atrocity, Sira said, which was the closest I had ever heard her come to naming a thing plainly. That is what gives it value and danger. We cannot change what happened to Harrow. We can choose what happens next with what is left. Dean pushed off from the bulkhead. What you mean is you can choose how to use it, he said. His eyes were red around the edges from staring too much. We know what happens to tech like this in your hands. It gets rolled out in other labs with other names until we're auditing a dozen Harrows. Sira's jaw set. Speculation. No, he said. History. I watched them, kept my hands flat on my knees and let the words pass through me. They said what I had been carrying since I saw the first torso draw breath. Gemma put the cylinder down. If we walk away and tag it, we are helping them keep it, she said. If we walk away and blow it, we kill whatever mind is left down there. Colonists, Lyle, all of it. We had one clear statement of the trap. There was no need to say it twice. She fell quiet. Dean folded his arms again. Gabe flexed his fingers and stared at nothing. Duncan, this is on you. You sign off. Your authority authorizes the tag. Or it does not. But I need you to understand the consequences of disobedience here. Sabotage will not be treated as a noble act. It will be treated as destruction of corporate property. You could run for the rest of your life and never get ahead of the warrants. I had spent years telling myself that if I followed scope, I was not responsible for what came after. I could walk through ruins, write objective lines, and sleep at night. Harrow had burned that story down. I stood. The movement made everyone look at me at once. Here are the consequences I understand, I said. If we tag that core, someone comes behind us with a ship and a drill. They haul out whatever they can drag free. They build smaller versions wherever budgets allow. Every place that runs short on bodies will be told this is a necessary tool. Sarah narrowed her eyes. You do not know that. I know myself, I said. I wrote parts of the earliest model because I believed using our own biology to stabilize new worlds was clever. I knew someone would cut corners. I did it anyway. That's why we're standing here having this conversation. Gemma watched me over steepled fingers. Dean's mouth flattened. Gabe sat up a little straighter. I turned to them. We can't make Harrow clean. We can decide whether it becomes a template or a warning, that's all. That was my single clear statement of what the story meant to me. I felt the air of the cabin tighten around it. I left it there. Sira's fingers tightened around her pen. What are you proposing? She asked. We bring the roof down, Dean said before I could. He understood me too well. We pull the power cores from the drones, pack them as charges and set them at the right points around the junction under Lyle. We overload them all at once. The explosion and the collapse will crush the core. You will die, Sarah said. At least one of you. Dean shrugged one shoulder. Someone always does. This way the count stops. Gemma reached for the console and brought up our current map. Her hands trembled once, then steadied. If we do it, we don't just blow it and leave the story blank, she said. We bake it into the record. We make the hazard map so bad that no one with a balance sheet will touch this world again. How? Sarah said, though she knew. She wanted us to say that part too. By telling the truth and then leaning on it, I said. We take every fault line, every gas pocket, every sign that the biosphere is volatile, and we extrapolate it. Still honest, worst case. We draw it so anyone who looks at it sees nothing but red. He means we turn the same tools you use to open worlds into the tools that lock this one, Gemma said. Gabe laughed once without humor. We're going to weaponize a report. Yes, I said. Sarah shook her head. You are already speaking as if this is decided. Duncan, I cannot authorize this. I'm not asking you to. You have my logs. You can clear your conscience with them. What I do next is on me. Silence picked its way around the cabin. No one moved. Then Dean clapped his hands once, as if starting a drill. "We need 8 cores, maybe 10 if the walls are thicker than they look. Give me 2 for the main junction and spread the rest around the supporting trunks. We rig them with a manual trigger. Wired. That way nothing jams the signal. Duncan, you and I place them. Gemma, you build the hazard map and help Duncan with the wording. Gabe, you fly us out if we're late." Gemma nodded. There was something like relief on her face that she had work to do now, not just decide. Gabe looked at Sarah's frozen face on the screen and then away. "You going to try to shut us down?" he asked her. "I am going to remind you what you are throwing away," she said. "You could walk off this planet debt-free, comfortable. Instead, you are choosing to die for a world that will not remember you." Gemma took a breath and spoke before I could. "It may not remember our names," she said, "but it will remember what we left here. That's enough." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her voice had gone back behind glass. "I cannot stop you," she said. "I can record that I advised against this. If you survive, you will face charges. If you do not, you will be listed as lost in a secondary collapse. That is all I can offer." "Then that's what we take," I said. The drone bay took up half of the lander's lower deck. Each drone was a stubby triangle with fold-out rotors and a power core set at its center of mass. The core was a sealed block of composite around a dense battery and conversion stack. They were built to run steady, not to explode. That was a matter of persuasion. Dean and I spread a cloth on the deck and laid the first drone on it. He opened it like a surgeon opening a chest, each panel set aside in order. Tools clinked against the metal as he worked. Gabe stood nearby, shifting from foot to foot, as if the drones were pets being dismantled. "You're sure you want all of them?" he said. "Once we strip these, I've got no eyes or fingers out there but my own." "You still have mine," I said. He snorted once. "Lucky me." Dean lifted the first core free and set it in the center of the cloth. Without its casing, it was about the size of his hand and thicker than his palm. Heat shimmered faintly over its surface. "We're going to overfeed them," he said. "Run them at a load they can't clear. They'll heat past tolerance and rupture. If we pack them tight and line the walls behind them with the old metal, we'll get a shock front strong enough to break the chamber." He handed me a spool of det cord, a cable filled with quick-burning compound used to connect charges so they went off at the same time. "You wire," he said. "You have smaller hands." I took the cord and a crimping tool and knelt beside the core. As I worked, my mind wandered back uninvited to old lecture halls and whiteboards covered in neat diagrams of soil horizons and biofilters. We had drawn lines between boxes, arrows showing flow from ground to life and back. I had been proud of those arrows. Now I was laying a different kind of link, one that would break the boxes for good. Gemma worked at the console in the corner. She was building the hazard map as we built the charges, turning the data from our beacons into a 3-dimensional image of the basin and everything under it. Whenever she saw something interesting, a hairline crack that extended farther than the eye could see, a suspicious low reading that might signal trapped gas, she dropped a marker. "You're going big," Gabe said to her, half admiring, half afraid. "I'm going honest," she said. "This is what it looks like when we don't round down." Once we had 10 cores wired and packed in soft foam to keep them from knocking one another before their time, Dean stood up and stretched his back. His shirt clung to him along the spine. "We should do this in one run," he said. "No back and forth. In, place the charges, link them to the trigger, out." "We don't all have to go down," Gabe said. "I can pull the trigger from up here." "We need someone with hands in the room if lines snag," Dean said. "If a charge slips, you can't fix it from orbit. 2 of us go, 2 stay. That's the safest we get." We all knew who had to go. Dean, because he understood how to place charges for a collapse. Me, because Lyle had asked me, not our employer. Gemma turned from her console. "I'll stay," she said. "I can finish the map and start drafting while you're down there." If anything changes on the seismics, I can warn you. Seismics were the readings that told us how the ground was likely to move when stressed. I nodded. Good, I said. Gabe stays too. If we make it back, he gets us out. You say that like you're sure you're coming, Gabe said. I say it like I don't have time to say it any other way, I answered. He did not argue. We geared up again. Dean slung a pack full of foam-wrapped cores over his shoulders, the cords coiled neatly on top. I took the trigger box, a small metal case with a simple switch. The det cord would run from the charges to this box. When I threw the switch, it would send a short burst of current that would trip all the cores at once. As we stepped to the hatch, Sarah spoke one last time. Duncan, she said, if you choose to stop, if you choose to tag instead, I will not report your hesitation. You can still walk off this world. I paused with my hand on the seal. I already walked off, I said. Years ago. This is the first time I've come back. I closed the hatch on her face. The tunnel down to the core had changed. The scar tissue plug we had cut at the door had grown back, thinner but spread wider. Fine cords crossed the opening in a web. They quivered in the air as we approached, as if aware of our heat and the small disturbances of our movement. Faster now, Dean said. He cut low and I held the strands up, letting them slide over my gloves. They twitched as they parted. When the gap was wide enough for us to duck through, the cut ends groped at the air behind us. Beyond the door, the slope down to the chamber was steeper. The floor that had been solid under our boots the first time now had a spongy give in places where tissue had pushed up through old cracks. Our weight made faint indentations that slowly smoothed behind us. It's closing in, Dean said. It knows where the threat is now. I know, I said. Move. We reached the lip of the core chamber. The mass below had grown. New trunks rose toward the ceiling. The pits of slurry were shallower, their contents spread wider along the floor. The bodies budding from the surface moved in ragged, almost coordinated ways, as if some weak signal ran through them in waves. At the center, Lyle lifted his head. You came back, he said. I wasn't sure. We brought tools, Dean said. Lyle's lips pulled back in what might have been a laugh. Good. We worked without talking after that. Dean moved along the edge of the chamber, picking points where the trunks met the floor and where the old support columns crossed into tissue. Those were the joints that carried weight. If we shook them hard enough, the entire roof would drop. He wedged each core into a recess, packing it against bone or rock, then called me over. I tied the det cord in, crimped the connector, and moved on. The cord followed us like a thin white snake, looped and pinned in place every few steps to keep it from tangling. Once, as I knelt to tie in a line, something brushed the back of my neck. I swatted at it on reflex. My hand hit a soft, cool surface. A half-grown hand had reached out from the wall at my level. It had 3 fingers and a thumb, each tipped with a pale nail that had not yet hardened. The palm had the familiar callus pattern of someone who wrote more than he lifted. It was my hand, minus scars of a later age. I stared at it for a heartbeat, then cut the cord where its wrist met the wall. The hand flexed once and hung limp. Duncan, Dean said sharply, we don't have time. I know. I finished the knot and stood. We were halfway around the chamber when the core moved. Not the small shifts we had seen before. The entire mass bunched like a muscle and then relaxed. The trunks nearest us swelled. Cords pulled tight. Hands and faces turned toward us in clusters. It feels the cord, Dean said. It's tracking us by tension. Then we go faster, I said. We did not have faster in us, but our bodies tried. Dean's breath grew short. My arms shook with the effort of holding and tying. The cord dug into the pads of my fingers through the gloves. We had 3 charges left when the wall by the tunnel mouth erupted. A flood of cords poured out, thick as hoses, thin as twine, all moving with a focused speed I had not seen before. They went for the nearest moving thing, Dean. He shoved the pack at me and turned to face them with his knife in his hand. The first cords wrapped his legs and jerked him off his feet. He slashed, cutting some, but more closed over his arms and chest. They lifted him into the air with a strength that did not match their size. "Cut the line!" he yelled. He meant the line to him, the suit tether he had clipped to a bracket near the wall as a safety measure. It was stretched taut now, pulling at his waist as the cords dragged him toward the core. I cut it. The tether snapped back. Dean swung free, then vanished into a knot of moving tissue. His knife flashed once in the mass, then disappeared. His comm activated with a short grunt and half a word. Then it went quiet. I did not call his name. There was nothing useful to say. The cords that had taken him writhed, then smoothed. New buds swelled along their length. One near my shoulder sprouted a shape that looked like the back of his hand. Lyle turned his head with painful slowness. "Get out," he said. "If you stay, it takes you too." "Not yet," I said. I finished placing the last 3 charges myself. My hands moved on training I had learned in safe rooms with clean diagrams, never meant for this. I jammed the cores into whatever cracks I could reach and wired them in rough. It was not neat work. By the time I reached the base of Lyle's trunk, the det cord ran like a web across the chamber. The trigger box hung from my belt, the main line clipped to its terminals. Cords from the core had started to reach for me. One looped around my ankle, another caught my wrist. They were stronger than they looked. When I pulled, they gave a little and then drew me back. "Duncan," Gemma's voice came faint over the comm. "Seismic spiking. The whole basin is unstable. If you're going to do it now." "Understood," I said. I looked up at Lyle. His eyes were open wide. He could see the cords on me. He could see what was about to happen. "It will use you," he said. "It will try to." "It already did," I said. "This is just the part I choose." The cords climbed my legs, my torso, my arms. One pressed against my chest, feeling for the beat inside. One wrapped my throat, gentle like a measuring tape. I could still breathe. For now. It pulled me closer to the trunk. New buds swelled around me, each one bearing a piece of my face. A jawline here, a cheekbone there, a tooth. I was being broken into parts before I was even inside. Pain came in long, hot lines where the cords bit through the suit and found skin. It was steady, like a burn that would not stop. I could feel my limbs being asked to move in ways they did not want to. Fingers opening and closing not on my own command. The trigger box hung heavy in my hand. A cord slid over it, trying to engulf it to make it part of the mass. I tightened my grip until my knuckles ached. "Tell me you're sure," Gabe said in my ear. His voice shook once. "I'm as sure as I was when I signed off on Anthroseed," I said. "This time I'm staying for the end." Lyle managed a smile, thin and crooked. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," I told him. "I'm sorry." Then I threw the switch. The date cord burned in an instant. It was built to. The flash ran along the lines we had laid, climbing walls and trunks, wrapping the core in a net of light. A fraction of a breath later, the power cores went. The blast hit like a giant's hand, clapping its palms around the room. For one clean moment, pain vanished. There was only force. The trunks shattered. The chamber walls buckled. The ceiling came down in chunks the size of small cars. I glimpsed Lyle's chest tear loose from the mass, his ribs breaking free, the harness snapping. Then Stone took us both. The world turned into weight and noise and nothing. I came back to myself in pieces. First there was pressure, like heavy blankets layered until you could barely move. Then there was light, dim and scattered, finding its way through cracks. Sound came last, faint, carried through stone. The far-off growl of shifting rock, the soft rasp of small slides. I could not feel my legs. I could feel my left arm up to the elbow. My right arm ended somewhere inside the rock. I tried to move my fingers, only one hand responded. Stone scraped skin. Something living tugged at my wrist and then let go. I did not repeat the motion. Time blurred. It had no clear markers in the dark, only the slow changes in weight above me and the occasional tremor that ran through the stone. At some point I realized I could feel more than my own body. A faint tug at the base of my skull, a slow thrum under my sternum. The core was not gone, not entirely. A thin remnant of the anthrocede network still threaded through me, rooted in the rock. Too small to move the world the way it had before, but enough to keep a few functions running. Enough to keep me alive. I could not hear Gemma or Gabe. I did not know if they made it back to the lander or up or out. I had to take it on faith that the map and the report survived me. Above, Harrow shifted and settled. Cords died. Others shrank back. The field of bodies I had seen from the rise would not look the same anymore. I would never see it again, but I could feel when portions of the network went quiet, like limbs falling asleep one by one. Eventually, the tremors lessened. The pressure on my chest eased a little. The stone around my face cracked in thin lines. A breath of cooler air touched my lips. I did not try to describe what it carried. I was not interested in giving it a name. I slept and woke without knowing which was which. At some point I stopped dreaming. Reality was enough. Years later, a phrase I feel more than count. The network around me stirred in a way I had not felt since the day of the blast. Vibrations ran through the rock in a regular pattern. They were not natural shifts. They were the footfalls of something walking above. Several somethings, moving in a deliberate line. Metal against stone. Voices, muffled but distinct, drifted through cracks and dead tissue. Right on the edge of the old basin. Maps say the ground dropped 20 meters. If the stories are true, we don't stay long. Their accents were not ones I knew. Younger, in a way that had nothing to do with age. Light grew ahead of me. A slab shifted. Dust rained down in a fine curtain. Then a section of the ravine wall gave way in a controlled cut, as if someone had used a compact drill. A face appeared in the opening, a woman in a lightweight exploration suit, visor up, eyes darting quickly as she took in the hollow. Behind her, two others waited, one holding a compact sensor wand, the other a camera on a shoulder harness. The hollow they had opened into was small, barely more than a niche in the rock. It held the remnants of what the collapse had not claimed. Me. I lay fused to the stone, my torso grown out of it, the lower half of me embedded. One arm was free from the elbow down. The other vanished into a mass of solidified tissue. My ribs were wired into a shelf of old metal. Cords like thin roots ran from my back into the rock. The anthrocede network had retreated and hardened, leaving me like an exposed knot. The woman's gaze travelled over me with the quick, careful study of someone used to dangerous things. When she reached my face, she flinched. "Oh," she said, that's not in the file." She stepped closer despite herself. The sensor wand in her hand beeped in a sequence that meant nothing to me. Her eyes focused on my mouth. I realized I could move it. It took everything I had. Muscles that had not been asked to do anything but survive for years spasmed. My jaw clenched, then opened. My tongue felt like a strip of dried leather in my mouth. I forced air through my throat, such as it was, and shaped a word. Leave. It came out rough and broken, but the meaning carried. I saw it land in her face. She froze. Behind her, the camera worker muttered something. The third person lifted a hand as if to pull her back. She did not need the help. She stepped away from me on her own, eyes wide, wand held tight in her grip. "You heard that," the camera worker said. "Yes," she said. "We're done." "But we got what we came for," she said, more firmly. "Proof enough. This place doesn't want us here." That last part was her putting words on what she felt, not what I had said, but I accepted the translation. It would serve. She backed out of the hollow, never quite turning her back on me until she had to. The others followed. Before they left, the camera swung once across the basin beyond. What I saw through that brief borrowed view eased something in me. The basin was a broken bowl now. The field of bodies was gone. Most of the cords had rotted or retracted. Here and there, small stumps of fused bone and stone stuck up like strange shrubs. No new forms budded from the ground. The land looked wounded but quiet. They climbed back to their skiff, a small craft with a narrow hull, painted in colors I did not recognize. Its engines kicked stones away as it lifted. It rose out of my line of sight and out of my reach. The vibrations of its departure faded. Silence returned, not empty, but settled. The kind of silence that follows a question, finally answered. I lay there with rock for legs and a dead network for a spine and looked up at the thin line of sky visible through the crack. Clouds passed, slow and indifferent. Somewhere far above, on worlds that would never see Harrow except in training modules and leaked footage, people would tell each other about the planet that grew humans from soil until someone burned the garden down. They would argue about whether it had been a sick genius or a necessary sin. They would use it as a boundary in conversations, as in, at least it's not Harrow. That was fine. Stories were another kind of cord. They ran through people and tied them to the past. Down here, I had one job left. It was simple. If anyone came close, I would lift my arm if I could and tell them to leave. If they were wise, they would listen. If they were not, Harrow would teach them why they should have. I watched the sky. The stone held me. The world rested. For the first time since I signed my name to an idea that should have stayed on a board, I felt like I was finally doing less harm.